What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? How are we doing? Went on with Coward as I do every Sunday night. We did about an hour reacting to the Bills losing to the Chiefs, who are going to their third straight Super Bowl, trying to win their third straight Super Bowl, and will take on the Eagles, who they beat to start this streak, where Andy Reid once worked with Howie Roseman. Your boy was there as well for a couple of those years, so I have a pretty good knowledge and feel for. I know a lot of people. You know, I talk to a lot of people in the NFL, and a lot of them work for these two teams. So, congrats to Howie. Congrats to Jeffrey Lurie. Congrats to Andy Reid and Brett Veach. Man. So I do want to just talk a couple big picture things. We broke down the games, Colin and I. We could probably break down more of the Eagles game. I don't really know what there's a breakdown. It was a talent discrepancy as wide as the Grand Canyon. But we went in depth on the Bills-Chiefs game. I just think that the two front offices for these two teams, specifically with the Eagles, just it can't really be overstated how awesome of a job they did building this team. So there's an intensity to both these two men, Andy and Howie. Sirianni. I mean, listen, Sirianni's taking a lot of shit. The guy's going to a second Super Bowl in 3 years. I've given him a lot. Now, he didn't call a timeout for a delay of game earlier in the first half that made me drive me nuts, but whatever. He's going to a Super Bowl, so who cares? But before we dive into some football, I do need to start with my friends, my partners, the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time. And if you want to go to a game, any game, college, pro, you name it, you want to go, you pick the arena, pick the stadium, pick the team. You want to go to a concert, pick the artist, pick the city. They got you covered because Game Time has flash price points, has a way to search by where you want to sit, the views of your seat, the price point on that given seat. Cannot recommend them enough. Been using them for years. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Where do we even start? Andy Reid taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. I thought the overall reaction, and listen, no one gets as angry as the referees or the officials as your boy right here when he's gambling on a game. So I get the emotions being high. And I also understand on individual calls that are egregious. I thought this conversation, like the Chiefs, they've won all these games over the last half decade just because of the officials, got a little crazy. I mean, what the fuck are we talking about? It's like, do you think Belichick bent over the Colts because the balls were deflated or because he had Eric Mangini's signs? I remember some of these conversations around the Pats. It's like, guys, they are consistently better than these other teams in the big moments. And the same can be said for the Kansas City Chiefs. And that was on full display tonight. When they needed a big play, they got it. When they needed a big blitz to hit home, they got it. When the Bills needed one, they did not get it. They had a lead in the second half at Arrowhead for the second time in, 3 or 4 years and couldn't get it done. Enough said, period, point blank, end of story. And listen, there have been moments, the Patrick Mahomes things on the sideline drives me nuts as well. But to think that they're only winning these games, and that's how it felt because of the officials, is the conversation just got lost. And I honestly stopped following it on the internet when I saw people screaming at Chef third day. I'm like, I don't care about any of this because that's not why the Chiefs have been winning. They make the critical plays when they have to. And the Ravens and the Bills simply do not. And those two teams view themselves as Super Bowl contenders when the years start for the last 3 or 4 years. And when the dust settles, the Chiefs are the only team there. And the only team to beat them over this run post Tom Brady is Joe Burrow. Why? Because he made big plays at Arrowhead. The other guys do not. The other teams do not. The other coaches do not. They fuck it up somehow. slash the Chiefs make plays. They're hard to beat. And if you are going to lose to a team, if you're Lamar Jackson, if you're Josh Allen, if you're going to lose to Michael Jordan, if you're going to lose to Tiger Woods, if you're going to lose to Tom Brady, it's not the worst thing in the world. You would rather lose to probably some of the historic great champions that the sport is ever going to see than just some random one-off. They are literally beating everybody. Why? They're more buttoned up. They're better coached. They're just better than you. I mean, it's just really that simple. They are just better than you. I think sometimes we overthink this stuff. Like, it's like, well, they're just not quite as good on offense. Well, yeah, their defense is dramatically better now. And in big spots, their defensive coordinator makes the greatest calls ever. And when he has to have it, Andy Reid's always going to get a first down. And when the game opens up and he gets his first script, it's just brilliant. It looks like Bill Walsh in his prime. He's not just the best coach in the NFL. He's one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport. He's one of the greatest coaches in the history of sports. And Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones are some of the greatest champions we've ever seen. And that's who you have to beat. Guys that know how to do it, guys that are comfortable in that moment, guys that have full belief they're going to get it done. And the Bills, I think, are one of the lone teams that believe they can beat them. I said this before, like, I don't think the Ravens think that. I don't think the Eagles are going to think that when they show up. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm just saying they're going to question, can we beat these guys? I do think the Bills, because they beat them so many times in the regular season, at least go into the game believing we can beat these guys. Hell, they had a lead in the fourth quarter, 22-21. But people had leads against Michael Jordan. People had leads against Tom Brady. And most of the time, they lost. It's pretty crazy. And no one plays this team better than the Buffalo Bills. And Sean McDermott, who worked for Andy Reid for a long time. My first year with the Eagles, Sean McDermott was the defensive coordinator. High-level cat. I think he's a good coach. But, like, I want to make some grand statement of, like, he's never, like, I don't know, maybe just no one's ever beaten these guys. I don't know what else to say. I really don't. I don't think, like, well, they got to make a change at coach. I mean, they were winning in the fourth quarter, 22-21. What else can you ask for? So Andy Reid is he's just an all-time great. And he has this unique thing going where his defensive coordinator is clearly one of the greatest defensive coordinators we've ever seen. Right? Bill Walsh had George Seifert in the mid-'80s. Mike Ditka had Buddy Ryan in the mid-'80s. Bill Parcells had Bill Belichick in the mid-'80s. All those guys, obviously, Walsh retires, Seifert becomes a head coach. Buddy Ryan goes to the Eagles, and Belichick goes to the Browns. Andy doesn't have to worry about this guy leaving. It is insane that every time he calls a blitz in a big spot, it works. Think of most coaches that are known as blitzers, guys that bring pressure. Sometimes they get burned dramatically, and it loses them a game, or it's an enormous play in a big spot. It feels like during this run, that never happens against Spags. His blitzes not only work, they like destroy the quarterback or destroy the play. It's 4th and 5. You're like, this is a big spot for Josh Allen and the Bills. Their season is on the line. Even though technically it wasn't, it kind of was. And then his blitz comes out of nowhere. It's not like he even showed it. The corner just lined up, and then he is in the backfield before you even blink. It's like, how does he do this? Why can't other people do this? Think how many fans of other teams look at their defensive coordinator 5 games into the season and be like, I don't think this guy knows what he's doing. And you got Spags, who's like Bobby Fischer out there playing chess. And then you got an offense in Mahomes that feels like their numbers aren't as sexy as they used to be, but are going to make the biggest plays in the biggest moments. And you have the best coach, not just in the league, like I said, potentially ever. Definitely on the short list. Like Andy Reid, win or lose this game, is easily on the short list with Belichick, Lombardi, Walsh. Like, that's the group he's in. So Sean McDermott, people are going to be like, well, what? I don't know. He's taking on, just remove Andy Reid and put in someone else. He's taking on Vince Lombardi. He's taking on Bill Walsh. Like, would anyone? I like Sean a lot. If I had the opportunity to hire Vince Lombardi or Bill Walsh or Sean McDermott, who are you taking? You could say the same thing about John Harbaugh last year. It's not a fair fight. This guy's way better than you. There's a discrepancy at coach. Andy's all time, and he's in the peak of his powers with the best player he's ever had, and obviously the best team he's ever had. And, I think Jim Johnson, who was an elite defensive coordinator, who taught Spags, who was a lot like Spags, brought the heat. The difference was those teams were awesome too. They had Donovan McNabb. This team has Patrick Mahomes. I think if you take Patrick Mahomes, this version, the last 5 years, and put him on those Eagles teams, they probably win a couple Super Bowls. Maybe Tom Brady doesn't win all the Super Bowls in the early 2000s. Maybe Andy Reid wins a couple of them. That's the difference. Belichick had Brady. He had Donovan McNabb. Donovan McNabb was a good player. Really good player. Pro Bowl level guy. He ain't this. So, like, when you give an all-time great coach an all-time great quarterback, they're going to rattle off Super Bowls. That's what happened with Belichick. That's what happened with Walsh. That's what happened with Jimmy Johnson. That's currently what's happening with Andy Reid. And it's remarkable to watch. If you like sports, I didn't have a dog in this race. I picked Buffalo. I ended up not betting on them because I used all my money in my account, a couple $1,000s, on the Torrey Pines golf tournament, and I thought it was a lock, and it was up until the last round, and so I didn't have any money, and I was like, I'm not doing this. It would have all been put on Buffalo. So it would have been back-to-back years betting against the Chiefs. You bet against the Chiefs, you lose. There's just like, you're an idiot. You bet against the Chiefs, you lose. You bet against Michael Jordan, you lose. You bet against Tiger Woods, you lose. That's where we're at now. You bet against Andy Reid, you're going to lose. Like, no one, I think the Eagles are pretty good. And I worked for Howie Roseman. Like, he's elite. I just watched the Red Sox Yankee documentary. I think it was on Netflix, maybe Amazon Prime. It was awesome. A lot about Theo Epstein. There are some parallels there with Howie. Now, I don't know if their personalities parallel each other perfectly, but in terms of how good they are at their job. When I think about the Kansas City Chiefs, I think Andy Reid. When I think about the Philadelphia Eagles, I think Howie Roseman. And Howie's intense. He is go, go, go 100 miles an hour. It's an intense environment to work for. But holy shit, he's good at his job. And what the Chiefs have done as they turned over this roster and they become a defensive team and a little less sexy on offense. Howie, I said this a couple weeks ago, his moves changed the franchise. One, after the Doug Peterson, Carson Wentz, Nick Foles kind of era, as they transitioned, they made a massive pivot when they picked Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. It was like an eye-opening moment for their front office scouting department and their organization. And they basically said, never again. We are not going to overthink this. We are going to take the best players from the best programs. And over a couple-year stretch, that's exactly what they did. Devontae Smith, Alabama. Landon Dickerson, Alabama. Jalen Carter, Georgia. Jordan Davis, Georgia. Nolan Smith, Georgia. Signed Saquon Barkley, number 2 overall pick, Penn State. Even Jalen, who I thought was a little bit of an overdraft, Alabama, Oklahoma. We're not going to draft. Well, this guy might be pretty good from Texas Tech. Sometimes it works. You get Patrick Mahomes. A lot of times it does not. Take the best players from the best programs and limit your chances of whiffing on a guy. And the Eagles, when you watch their team, you're like, holy shit, they're good. And this team is loaded with moves he made. And last year, and I saw someone tweet this, they were very, very close from firing Nick Sirianni and hiring Bill Belichick. That almost happened basically a year ago today, within a week or two, sometime in the middle of January, right? And they didn't, and they stuck it through. Well, what does Jeffrey Lurie do a really good job of? Pay premiums when he needs to. He gives Vic Fangio $4.5, $5 million a year. He pays Kellen Moore $3.5, $4 million a year. So he has 2 coordinators making a combined $8, $9 million. And listen, Sirianni, the guys like him. He's a high energy, positive guy. I'm not really sure what he's doing. Doesn't totally matter. Why? Because they have a high-priced offensive coordinator. They have an elite defensive coordinator. and they have an elite general manager. You could argue the Eagles are the only team in the league where the owner would be comfortable paying the general manager much more than the coach. Nick Sirianni should not make more than Howie, even though he probably does just because his position pays more than GM. Even if Howie's one of the highest paid GMs, it might be $5 or $6 million. Low paid coaches make 7. But when you watch today, anyone in the league could have had Saquon Barkley. They gave him $27 million. 8 teams passed on Jalen Carter. And I get why some of them did it. Risk. This guy's not going to fit in our organization. Every time you watch them play, he's like the best player on the field. No guard can block the guy. It's why way too early look ahead. That defensive line for the Eagles, which has really come on, is going to be a tough matchup for the Chiefs. It is. Especially, Nolan Smith's coming on, Jalen Carter. Like, they got some dudes. And it's because of Howie Roseman. Like, think about this draft. He was patient. He got a little lucky because all the quarterbacks went and no one took defensive players. And he got the best corner in the draft by a mile. And then he trades up in the second round and gets Cooper DeJean, who, listen, everyone likes making fun of. This white corner, who I don't know is awesome and is a plug-and-play starter at nickel, which in the NFL is a starter. So all of a sudden, in his draft, he gets Mitchell starting outside corner. He gets Cooper DeJean starting nickel. The previous year, he drafted Jalen Carter, who's one of the best defensive linemen currently in the NFL. He adds Saquon Barkley this offseason. It's like, that's kind of why their team's so awesome right now. Because last year, their DBs sucked, and Saquon Barkley has changed the franchise. Ran for a couple thousand yards. Today, first carry goes for 55, 60 yards, touchdown, sets the tone for the game. And one thing, and I mentioned this with Colin, that I learned when I was in Philadelphia, and Andy Reid taught Howie. Offensive line, defensive line. Defensive line, offensive line. It's why, listen, look ahead at this draft. If I'm the Titans and I am not going to take a quarterback, under no circumstances can I love Travis Hunter. He's one of the most remarkable prospects I've ever seen. But Abdul Carter is an elite prospect as well. It is a no-brainer. You take the guy at the line of scrimmage. Obviously, you take a quarterback. But if you're not comfortable taking one of the quarterbacks, take an offensive lineman or take a defensive lineman. Because that is where the game is won. Think about what the Chiefs did. They traded Tyreek Hill. They added McDuffie and they added Karlaftis. They didn't go draft another wide receiver. Well, they did this upcoming year at the end of the first round in Xavier Worthy, which I think today, and I mentioned this with Coward, it's like, can you imagine being a Bills fan? I'm watching Xavier Worthy this last month really come on. It's like, we traded that pick with the Chiefs. Couldn't we just have taken Xavier Worthy? And I like Keon Coleman. But all these games come down to, because the NFL, you're constantly churning your roster. You're constantly getting new guys on the team in the offseason, in the draft, in free agency, in training camp. So year to year, your teams change. DeAndre Hopkins wasn't on this team last year. Xavier Worthy wasn't on this team last year. Right? Kareem Hunt wasn't on this team last year. So I know he's been on the team before, but you add new players. You get new blood. And your general managers, your team building matter so much. Look at the Chiefs. They drafted an offensive tackle in the second round. They thought the guy could be the starter. And then they found out he could not be the starter. Maybe one day he'll be ready, but right now he wasn't ready. So what did they do? They pivoted, and they pivoted quickly. And I think both these two guys, Andy and Howie, and I spent 2 years when I worked in the office before I did college scouting. I was around Howie a lot. My first year, when I was the lowest guy on the totem pole, I was essentially Howie's assistant. It is an intense place. Honestly, a couple weeks in, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. It really crossed my mind. I don't know if I can do this. It was just my stress levels, the intensity, the pace in which Howie operates. It's just the NFL, the pressure you felt. There was a scene tonight when the Eagles won the conference, right? And they have the celebration in the middle of the field. And they got Jeffrey Lurie up there on the stage. Even before, when he was going up with a couple minutes left, putting in the face of everyone, one more game, one more game. It's not like Jeffrey Lurie's just content with winning the NFC. Like he was pretty adamant. He was barely smiling. And I remember in a documentary about the Raiders when uh when the John Madden, the 70s Raiders finally won the Super Bowl, and in the locker room after they had finally won a Super Bowl in, like, I think it was 75 against the Minnesota Vikings, and Al Davis went up to Kenny Stabler, the quarterback, and said, like, "Are you ready to do this again next year?" And Kenny Stabler, and he was interviewed for this documentary. He's like, "I remember thinking, like, Al, we just won the Super Bowl. Can't you just enjoy it for 10 minutes?" And there's an element of the Eagles that, like, I remember thinking, like, that kind of reminds me of the Eagles. It's like next day, next thing, next day. Like these guys don't celebrate things long. Andy's probably a little happier than kind of the Eagles operation. Not that the Eagles aren't happy, but like both these two operations are going to be 100% like on to the next opponent at 6 in the morning, Monday morning. Like this is not a world of celebratory forever like most fans. Like fans are going to be happy as a pig in shit if you're a Chiefs fan or an Eagles fan all week for the next 2 weeks. It's not really how you think. When you're a coach, when you're a GM, you're just on to the next thing. Your scouting staff's at the Senior Bowl. Like, what do we have to do? What scheme do we have to run? How do we slow down Saquon Barkley? These guys are just intense, man. And I think Howie is easily the best general manager in the NFL. I think his combination of understanding elite talent, understanding team building of where he when he started to where he's at now, the depth they have at the line of scrimmage. I mean, think about today. Their center's hurt, can't start the game. They have to mix and match. Dickerson goes to center. He gets hurt. He's battling through with a bad knee. Comes out of half. He can't go. So then Jurgensen comes back in with a bad back. And it's like they just got play. They have, I mean, the amount of players they have, half the teams, I watched the NFL for 18 straight weeks. Some teams lose one offensive lineman, the whole thing fucking falls apart. And there's a depth to the way these two guys do it because they just focus on the line of scrimmage. And they value coordinators like Steve Spagnuolo and Vic Fangio are the highest paid coordinators in the NFL. Liam Cohen was going to join that list until he got the Jags job. But I just, the talent discrepancy in the game today was really, really wide. And we knew that going in. It's like, I just, Jaden has to be remarkable. And he was for a lot of the game. But they're in a gunfight and they got a revolver and the other team has an Uzi. It's like it's going to be really hard to take down the dude with the Uzi, and that's what it felt like watching the Eagles. Like the Bills, I don't think are as talented as the Chiefs, but because of Josh, but because like they're just mentally tough, they've been through the ringer. Like that game was close for a reason. Just two well coached teams. They're tough. They've played in a lot of big games. They have a superstar quarterback. Washington, I mean, that wasn't even a fair fight. I thought it was crazy that the game was even that close. So I just, you know, Sirianni, he's taken a lot of shit over the years, and rightfully so. I have nothing against the guy personally. I don't totally know what he does, but he clearly rallies the troops and guys like him. And, when he was up there with Jeffrey Lurie and he's hyping up Jalen Hurts, he's good with relationships. And he gets credit for letting his coordinators cook and being a positive influence on the building. And clearly, Howie likes him, and people in the building like him. Like he's a good guy. He just gets emotionally spent, and that's Big Dom going back to another Super Bowl. One of his roles is to keep him calm. But I'm excited. A lot of people were poo pooing this matchup. I don't want Chiefs. I don't want the Eagles again. No, these are the two best teams. I mean, Eagles are clearly the best team in the NFC, and the Chiefs fucking earned it. I mean, this is back to back years. Last year on the road at Buffalo, on the road against the Ravens. This year, the Texans, but then taking on that Bills team who just threw the kitchen sink at them, and it's just not enough. And I'll never say again that you just Chiefs, man. They just they just find a way. They covered too because they were 1.5 point favorite and they win by 3. So congrats to Andy Reid. Congrats to Chiefs Kingdom. Congrats to everyone in Philadelphia. Just one game left, and let's enjoy it. We're obviously going to talk a lot about it, and brings back some memories. I'm excited for all my buddies. try to get a ring. If my friends that work for the Chiefs, I mean, they have an unlimited amount of rings. So this is just like an extra ring for the trophy case. But the Eagles, this would be a big moment. This is, I mean, this is a big game for both teams. Obviously, I mean, the Chiefs are chasing such a historic. Like no one's ever winning three straight Super Bowls. It's never happened before, and if it happens this time, no one's ever duplicating that again. Like that's impossible. It's insane that the Chiefs are even here. But this would be a big moment for Philly. Their second Super Bowl in less than a decade. They've been to three during that span. They've won with two different quarterbacks. And like I said, I mean, I'm not trying to get Howie a raise here or anything, but I don't see how, if I was Howie Roseman, I'm like $20 million general manager. I mean, Jeffrey, look at this team I built. I mean, holy shit. And if we're the team that beats the Chiefs, enough said.